Human trafficking is big business around the world, and somebody who knows a lot about sex trafficking because he's involved in a counter sex trafficking organization called the Guardian Group is my friend Jeff Tiegs.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Jeff and I go way back. We actually were in the same squad in Ranger School, but we haven't talked to each other in a long time until just a week or so ago. And I'm really glad to get back in touch with you, Jeff. Thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure, Chuck. Thanks for having us.
So let's talk about sex trafficking for a minute. Tell me the scope of the problem as you have found it and, just how bad it actually is.
Well, one of the first things I think people need to understand, Chuck, is that this is a big business, and they have to look at it as a business. So you have to, in your mind, break it down into supply and demand, producers, consumers, et cetera, all of these pieces that are moving together. The difficulty with that is the product is a human being. So it's difficult sometimes for people to get their head around it. But if that's kind of the start point, that this is an underground commercial industry, this is an illicit economy, it is billions of dollars worldwide and somewhere close to $1 billion in the United States. And when I'm using those numbers, that's just the commercial sale of men, women, boys, girls. That's not including pornography and these different camming sites, et cetera. It is big, big business. And they have a hard time estimating. Guardian Group's estimate, as I've been looking at this for a couple of years, is that there is approximately 1 million girls, minors, that are involved in commercial sex in the United States every year.
Just in the United States?
Just in the United States. And that isn't continual. One of the old numbers is that somewhere between 100,000, 300,000 minors are introduced into the sex trade each year. That number is about a decade old. So I would estimate that at any given time, there are about 300,000 minors actively being sold in the United States. Again, about 1 million of them over that course of time where it ebbs and flows with that exploitation.
How does this happen? I mean, this is a world I don't know anything about. We've done documentaries on sex trafficking around the world, but we focused more on kind of international sex trafficking. How does this happen in the United States?
So it happens differently around the world. And one of the things that's interesting about the United States is because we have a very capable government. Okay, and we'll just agree at that right now, right? Like we don't want to get down that road of what our government can and can't do. But when it comes to looking at capabilities and law enforcement and our rule of law and our court systems and just kind of the way that our Western systems work through, you would think there wasn't as much room for this level of exploitation, but it creates a different flavor and a different style. A lot of people think sex trafficking is kidnapping and smuggling and that type of thing. That is a flavor of it in much of the world where you don't have law enforcement that would go after those kidnapping victims. When I gave a class a couple of months ago, and I asked a group of police officers, I said, what would happen if you got a report that a young girl was kidnapped? And the cop said, all of us would stop what we were doing and they would search for that girl. And that's the truth. Same with the community. The community begins to hold their breath when a young girl goes missing. But now the flip side of that is a 16-year-old girl runs away. What does law enforcement do about it then? There are some protocols that they have in place, and they'll begin to look for that girl usually after about 24 hours. If there are other signs of her at risk to be involved in trafficking, they may work faster. But again, they've got a lot of stuff that they're trying to do. Now, make that girl 18 and she, quote unquote, runs away. What is running away when you're 18? As an adult, you can do whatever you want. So that's where they hide under this. They do kidnap girls also, but the predominance of the market, somewhere in the high 90% of the American market and the market in the West, is they just assess and groom, and they lure these girls slowly and surely away from their families and those things that keep them safe until they get to the point where they largely disappear, or they largely are kind of, they just kind of disappear, and then they reappear at different points.
Yeah, until the point where they basically own them, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about. So how does that grooming process work? I mean, if I'm a parent, I've got a teenage daughter who's 16 years old. What are the signs that something's wrong that I need to be watching out for?
Well, that's the $1,000,000 question also, Chuck, because the nefariousness of this crime and why it's absolutely really difficult to combat is it takes advantage of those life cycle events that we all go through as young kids. So the average age of entry into the sex trade in the United States is about 15 years old. Okay. Now, I hope that shocks some people. But again, if you put some real common sense against this, and keep in mind what I said, it's not the average age of the girl for sale. We believe at Guardian Group, the average age of the girl for sale is about 18 or 19. Okay. Because we have laws. If you sell a boy or girl when she's under 18, that's automatic trafficking. If she's 18 or older, it's just a pimping charge. And that's a very different penalty. So they're smarter about it. But that sweet spot for a trafficker is to find that boy or girl when they're 13, 14, 15 years old, and they begin to pull them away from their parents. Because what's happening to us, when we're that age? I mean, Chuck, we met each other when we were about 19, I think. We were like 18 or 19 years old.
That's right.
And what were we looking for? Why did you join the military?
I wanted something to prove myself as a man. When I look back, that's really what it was all about. I thought I was doing it for duty, honor, country, and all that. But in reality, I needed to prove myself as a man. I needed to get out from underneath my parents.
Yeah, you need to get out from underneath your parents. You need to prove yourself as a man. And then I think if you scrape the surface a little bit, you were also looking for other like men to be in a fellowship with, right?
Sure. Yeah.
That's what happens to every young man. And that's why you see some young men gravitating towards crime and these gangs when they don't see other options. You and I gravitated towards the military. Now,
I've always said that America doesn't have a gang problem. It has a fatherlessness problem. If a father doesn't create that sense of belonging to our family, then a boy's going to go looking for that somewhere else.
Yep. And do you have daughters, Chuck? We talked about your family.
Daughters.
How old are they now?
Well, one's 16 and one is 23.
All right. So you're in the middle of it with your 16-year-old. So either one, again, we don't want to exploit your children and violate their confidence. But what happens to a young lady when she is 14, 15, 16? We are looking what it means to become a man. We're looking to challenge ourselves and kind of validate ourselves. We're looking for this fellowship of warriors. What are these girls looking for?
Well, I mean, I used to teach 10th grade Sunday school, and I can tell you that all teenagers kind of go through this phase when they're maybe starting about 14, where they need to establish themselves and identify as their own person. They need to get out from under their parents. Typically, and teenagers are stupid. I mean, just face it. Teenagers are stupid. They have all the capabilities of an adult without the connections being made up here sometimes. So what that leads to is bad choices. And I saw it very often in the girls in my 10th grade Sunday school class. They can't go out and do drugs. They're not going to, they're good girls. They're not going to go out and do drugs. They're not going to go out and just, run away or anything, but they need to rebel somehow, and so they become a vegetarian. Now, they could care less about the health aspects of being a vegetarian, but it's like something that they can control about their own lives that they want to take charge of. Now, these are church girls. These are girls who were raised in a Christian environment. But if you take girls that were not, that didn't have a daddy who loved them, that didn't have come from a functional family, Now you've got girls who, I mean, I saw a documentary the other day where these two girls, they said, we've been watching pornography since we were little, and I couldn't wait to perform, to be a porn star. That's what I wanted to do my whole life. And these girls are like 16, 17 years old. And I'm just sitting there with my eyes bugging out. I can't believe it. But my question there is, where's their daddy? Because a daddy who makes a girl understand her worth as a human being is going to help his daughter avoid those kinds of choices, hopefully. But what do you see?
So, dude, you're nailing it. That's exactly what we're talking about. So the highest risk category are those girls that don't have a father or a broken family, or even worse, are abused. You know, I think I saw the exact same thing that you were discussing, where these beautiful young women, but again, if you listened closely, they both had been abused. They both had been sexually abused. Like that sexual abuse, where how that opens up this giant crack for these pimps and traffickers to come in, that is like a superhighway. But let's go back to these healthy girls, because I think this is important for people to understand. So you picked the girl that went to become a vegetarian, but how many did you see that were still looking for validation from a boy?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know?
And if they're not getting, because a girl needs three things. She needs provision, protection, and affection. And if she doesn't get those three things from her daddy, she's going to go looking for those things from somebody, and she'll get them somewhere else. And unfortunately, when I was a teenage boy, I learned that lesson early and figured out that if I could find a girl that didn't have a dad who gave her those three things, I could give her any one of those three and get anything I wanted from that girl.
Chuck, you're answering your question. Okay, you're answering the not the what does it look like, but you're answering the question on what is that opening. How many times did you have to, as a Sunday school teacher or as a dad, reaffirm to a girl that she was a beautiful creature of God and she had inherent worth? How many times, even your own children?
All the time.
And even as a dad, I want to make this clear to people, even as a dad, you can never do it enough. Okay, that's why we're both believers. We know there's only one place a person can get that validation. So any of those weaknesses, there can be a giant crack because you were exposed to pornography as a child. There can be a giant crack because you were physically, sexually, emotionally abused. Or there is just that simple crack that begins that break from family, like you've aptly described. And that is a place for that trafficker and pimp. And these girls that you described, these Sunday school girls that are rebelling by becoming vegetarians, that is a higher priced commodity that is of interest to the trafficker than that broken down girl. Okay, because think of this as a commodity, and think of what that girl just physically looks like.
Right.
She's healthy, she's beautiful, she's smart, she's not addicted to drugs. Yeah. So there is a market out there for our Christian girls, because they are able to sell them at a higher price.
This is the age range where, as I heard a poet describe it one time, as where a woman's flower is fully open, where she is at the peak, she's perfectly ripe for especially sexually, for those perverts and pimps and people like that who are willing to pay for that commodity. And so, gosh, what a threat that we have to face here, especially in today's society where pornography is so prevalent that unfortunately, there are far more perverts and wackos out there than there used to be.
So on that idea still, okay, I've talked to pimps that they've straight up explained, look, these girls that come from stable homes, they are able to sell them for a higher price. Okay, so they target them specifically. Also, this pimp, he's looking for a challenge sometimes. Like, he knows he can go find that woman who's addicted to crack, or that woman who's so abused she'll do anything to get one of those three things you mentioned previously. But it's an ego thing. It's a challenge for him to break a girl away from this stability, a conservative Christian home. And when he's able to win that girl, that builds his confidence and self-esteem.
Yeah,
I mean, dude, how diabolical is that?
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And then And then here's something that we need to remember also as believers. The other thing that these survivors we've talked to and these pimps we've talked to will tell you, that what they need to get these girls to do to break them away is very, very small. Okay, so what I mean by that is if you were a girl that was abused by your father, your uncle, your brothers, your neighbors, okay, what's your level of shame? You've been abused your entire life. Like
you feel like damaged goods.
Yeah, like shame. What's shame? She has lived in shame. But now you take these girls that you taught in Sunday school, and if you can get them to say a curse word, or if you can get them to do some very minor thing, like maybe what do you call it?
A nude selfie or something like that.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Sexting back and forth, or even some sort of sexual act. Now that becomes something where you have broken that shame barrier.
That's and that
girl, yes, it's a lever where she's so ashamed that she doesn't want her friends to know about it. She doesn't want her parents. She doesn't want her Sunday school teacher. So it's that lever that they begin to crack open, and they just do this and I won't tell anybody. Just do this and I won't tell anybody. And the next thing you know, that girl is trapped in that world where she doesn't feel like she can ever come back out. So we, as a community, have got to be a lot more gracious and graceful and allowing these boys and girls when they're on this path to be able to come to us and not shame them. Dude, the American Christian church is not very well known for lacking judgment.
Yeah, we're really good at shooting our wounded, aren't we?
That's a terrible way of putting it, but it's brilliant. Yeah, shooting our wounded. Yeah. So I think that's an immediate lesson is we have got to be open to what these kids are going to go through and not making them feel like the door is closed. You know, and many of us, the tough love, it backfires.
Okay, folks. So Jeff and I had such an incredible conversation about sex trafficking and what the Guardian Group is doing about it that I had to break it into 3 entire podcasts. So all week this week, we're going to be talking about sex trafficking with Jeff Tiegs, and we're going to hear the second of the 3 podcasts next podcast, which is Wednesday. And so make sure you come back for that, because this is mind-boggling. If you have daughters, if you have sons, if you know anybody that's a teenage girl, you need to hear this information. And so share it with your friends, spread it around. We'll be back again on Wednesday. See you soon.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.